Well, good morning, everybody. We have a good amount of people, and it's a very good morning in August over here in Alpine. We did wake up at 66 degrees, so I'm kind of grateful for that. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. It's the Beyond Barbed Wire Virtual Fencing. I am Silverio Avila, Assistant Professor and Extension Ranger Specialist with both Texas A&M AgriLife Extension and Borderlands Research Institute here in Alpine, Texas. And I'll be your host today. Just a little quick few housekeeping items before we get going. If you have any questions during the talk, we're going to leave all those to the end, but please go ahead and type it into the Q&A or the chat, and I'll be happy to just read those out to the presenters. We are recording today's sessions. You should be muted and the camera should be shut off for all the attendees. And we should be done about 60 minutes or so, around 11 a.m. Central Time. So we'll also follow up with some of the resources we'll be posting down here in the chat today as well. But keep an eye out for an email for a survey link to help us improve our programs. So with that, you'll be entered to win a door prize. It's a very interesting book, and we'll ship it out to you directly. So we'll know who answers the surveys and all that stuff. So getting into the main topic. So this is so what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about virtual fencing. Virtual fencing lets you manage livestock with GPS collars instead of setting up interior physical fencing. So it helps you to keep cattle livestock out of sensitive areas and even out grazing distribution. The experts here will talk a little bit more about it during their presentation. But so there's a lot of interest in virtual fencing, and it's picking up across Texas rangelands. So we've been getting a lot of questions of how does this actually work, and what support is out there for putting it to use in your operation, right? So I wanted to share with y'all, there's a publication we put together with Borderlands Research Institute and AgriLife Extension. It's we try to send it out about two or three times, publish 2 or 3 of these a year. It's a Trans-Pecos Rangelands Management Bulletin, and the one I'll be sharing it in the chat, the link for it, but y'all can look at it in AgriLife Learn, and it has a good section about virtual fencing, vision and mission of your for your operation and how to follow that to be successful as well. So as a reminder, this is an educational overview. We're not selling you anything. The goal is to help you understand the technology and your options so you can decide what fits your operation. You'll hear from NRCS about conservation programs that may help support it, and from 2 representatives of No Fence and Halter and how their system works. So we'll leave questions to the end. And with that, we have first up, we have Sawyer Warwick with USDA NRCS. He's a zone rangeland management specialist based in San Angelo, where he provides support and guidance on rangeland practices across 52 counties, an area running from the hill country all the way to over here to the Trans-Pecos. He's got a degree in natural resource management from Angelo State, and he's been with NRCS for 14 years, working with producers across the state. He's going to give us an overview of the conservation programs that may help support virtual fencing adoption. And Sawyer, I'll turn it over to you.
Like Silverio said, I'm Sawyer Warwick, Rangeland Management Specialist for the Natural Resource Conservation Service, located here in San Angelo, but to cover kind of Southwest Texas, providing support to our field offices. We got field office just about every county throughout the state or the nation. So if you haven't met your field office personnel yet, I'd recommend figuring out where they're at, or reach out to me and I can get you their contact information and try to make a relationship with them, see how they can help you out on your farm or ranch. And I'm going to talk a little bit about programs and how virtual fencing can fit into them. Now, I do want to say that I'm not going to go real deep into each one of our programs. And I'm not an expert on virtual fencing and all the aspects and everything on how it works. I do get the privilege to work with a lot of people that are utilizing virtual fencing. So I've seen a lot of good examples of how they fit into the operation. I'll share some of those with you. But I'm not the expert that tells you exactly how the caller talks to the base station or the cell service or the satellite service or anything like that. So we do have a couple people, Mark and Colin, they're the experts on the virtual fencing, and they'll follow me up and probably correct a lot of things I say wrong. But I just want to talk a little bit about what NRCS can and cannot do when it comes to virtual fencing. So first off, our main goal when we start talking about virtual fencing is grazing management, and how can we utilize virtual fencing to improve your grazing management program. And so one thing that NRCS can do is we can see if that is a good alternative for your operation. And how we do that is we meet you out there on the land, we evaluate all your existing resources, and that being existing fences, what type of grazing management plan do you have in place now? Where's your livestock water? What type of forage is available? How much forage is available? And all that information, and we can use that information to determine, will virtual fencing help this producer meet the goals on their farm or ranch? And if so, how can we design that grazing system using virtual fencing to meet that producer's goals? Another thing that we often do is whenever a producer is interested in working with a virtual fencing company, oftentimes they might need maps or shape files to share with them. And that way they can determine, hey, is this going to work on my cell, or if I want to use cell service, will this work? Or if I need base stations, how many do I need? So us at NRCS, we can determine, or we can develop those shape files and those maps and send them to you, or with your approval, we can send them to the virtual fence company, and they can run it through their system to determine what type of infrastructure you need for your virtual fence system to work correctly. One thing NRCS does not do, we don't endorse or promote a specific product or company. There's a lot of great companies out there. We got two of them that are going to talk with us today. And I'm going to show you a little slide from University of Arizona that covers all of the virtual fence companies. But us at NRCS, we do not recommend one over the other. Another thing we do not do is we do not design that system for you. We can't tell you how many base stations you need or don't need. We can't tell you if it's going to work off cell service or if you have to use satellite. We can't tell you any of that information. That is your job as the rancher to work with the manufacturer to determine what all type of equipment is needed for that system to function properly on your land. Now, we did get some new practice scenarios. In fiscal year 25 was the first year that we had some payment scenarios available for virtual fencing, and they changed drastically in 2026. Now, with that being said, all I have is the data that we had in 2026, and it's probably going to change again in 27. But I wanted to share this information with y'all. That way y'all can kind of see what it would look like if you were to do virtual fencing in one of our financial assistance programs. Now, this can be, if you're familiar with our financial assistance program, this can be through our Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP. This can be through our Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. This scenario is available in all of those programs that we have available to you as the producer. And it's going to be very similar it's going to be very similar across all those programs. But one thing, when we start talking about fencing, whether it's virtual fence or permanent fence or any type of fencing, most of the time we're putting that fence in to implement a grazing plan. And so one of the items that we're always going to look at, including in that financial assistance program, is going to be grazing management, or 528. And so we do have a virtual fence scenario available under 528. This can be planned for years 2 through 5. Once you purchase the virtual fence system and you get it implemented on your land and you start following the grazing plan that NRCS will help you develop that meets your goals, you can start following that grazing plan. Then we'll have that grazing management that's a yearly payment for years 2 through 5 after installing the virtual fences. Now, I want to say the payment for that is, and I had it in my notes here, but for some reason I'm not looking at presenter view. But anyways, I think it was around $40 or $51 per head per year. So if you had 100 cows that you put the collars on, then it'd be 100 times that number for years 2 through 5, and that would be the payment you'd receive, assuming that you follow that grazing management plan. Now, the main scenario that we look at to help you get that virtual fence adopted is the fence 382 conservation practice. So there are several different layers that are available in 26 of this. The first one would be your base cost, and that is just to help incentivize the one-time cost of you adopting the system and covering up to 2 base stations. So if you're going with a system that needs base stations, that virtual fence and base cost would cover the first 2. Now, if you needed an additional one, say you needed 3 or 4 base stations, then we also have a transmitter station payment scenario available that can pay for any additional over 2 base stations. So that base cost is, just for easy numbers, it's like $8,300 what it was in 2026. And that's just to help you get the system started. And then if you need more than 2 base stations, we were paying like $5,000 or $5,500, somewhere around there. Don't hold me to these numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but around $5,000 per base station over 2 that you need. Now, you'll also get what's called an implementation cost, and that's going to be paid per head. So again, like the example I gave earlier, if you have 100 collars, we're going to pay you 100 units or animal units or collars of the implementation cost, and that was around $40 per collar. And so you'll get that as soon as you install them on the livestock, whether you're looking at sheep, goat, or cattle, and you can show us that, hey, these are functioning properly on our livestock. This right here, I didn't develop this. Again, we don't recommend any companies over the other. This is from the Arizona State University, and they update this pretty regular. This might not even be the most recent one, but it's the most recent one that I have. But it's a great thing if you're a producer that's looking at which company to kind of narrow it down. These are all the companies that I'm aware of that Arizona State knows as well that are in the U.S. And it talks about what type of software. Can it be ran off the mobile app, or do you have to have a computer? The connectivity, does that need base stations? Can it be cellular? Can it be satellite? Is it a combination of the 2? Then the battery life, how long does that battery life last? There are some herd sizes on all of them. Some of them, if you look down there, for example, No Fence has, you just need 5 collars and you'll be eligible. But if you go to Vince, for example, they need 100 collars. So if you don't have 100 cows, then maybe Vince is not the one for you. The pasture size, how small can you get those pastures? Again, this goes back to whatever your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish with those grazing animals. The upfront costs, and maybe Mark or Colin, when they talk, this might have changed since this came out in May of 2026. But in May of 2026, this is what the cost approximate was for each company. And then the yearly cost, which is your subscription fee, and I'm sure they'll talk about a little more in depth later. But I think this is a good thing to kind of start narrowing some down to see which one might fit your program best. So some items, why should we go virtual? I mean, there's a lot of different reasons. Flexibility is huge when we start talking about grazing management. And if we can put those fences anywhere on our property based on our goals, then that is so much more flexible than a permanent fence would be that we build one time and we hope that it lasts 50, 60, 70 years, especially on the cost of it. We can see some changes and change those grazing patterns, or we can move herds more rapidly or slower, or whatever the case might be. Another thing is we can see where our cows or sheep or goats are at any given time. If we need to check on one, we can pull it up on the app or on our computer and see where that cow is or that sheep or goat is. Labor, it could decrease a lot of labor or input. Just for example, one guy that I worked with, he was shredding with the skid steer, mesquite, creosote, tar bush to lay fence lines for electric fence, and he was moving cows, every few days, and he was having to move and drag that fence up. Well, the labor was very high on that, and once he switched to that virtual fence, he could move them with his phone, which really cut down his labor and got some time back working on some things that he felt were more important. Wildlife movement is a big deal, especially when you go look at West Texas, and we have animals like pronghorn antelope that can be constricted to the movement of permanent fences or or the prairie chickens and stuff like that, the virtual fence does not impact that wildlife movement. We can also manage sensitive areas. Maybe we have a riparian area or something that's out there that we really want to focus on improving the health of. We want to flash graze it, but not very long, and then keep livestock off of it. But the infrastructure is not there. Maybe that's because every time we build a fence on there, the creek comes up and it washes it out. I mean, one thing we saw a lot last year here in Texas, the 4th of July floods, and even some of the flooding this year, was the amount of fences that were destroyed due to that flooding. Whereas if we had virtual fencing, we could have moved those cows up on dry ground without having to go and repair water gaps and keep them out of certain pastures. In fact, there's some, I was with the producer last week that he had to move his cows to another pasture that he wasn't ready to yet because he had water gaps down and he hasn't had time to get them all fixed. Where if we had virtual fencing, we could keep them in those areas. This is just kind of some example of some of the grazing plans that you could use virtual fencing. Rotational grazing, it doesn't have to be high intensity, but maybe you could do a rest rotational grazing system that you weren't unable to do in the past due to your fencing or water or anything like that. Maybe you're unable to graze some areas, so maybe we can look at some areas now, the whole farm grazing, to really go in there and start grazing areas we have in the past, whether that's cropland or some sensitive areas or cover crops or something like that. We can use them for targeted grazing. Maybe we're trying to target some brush species and really stack goats in there heavily. And we can't do that with permanent fencing, but we can with virtual fencing to kind of get the most use out of that brush and apply some suppression techniques. Or maybe we have an annual weed outbreak that the livestock will eat. We can use those virtual fences to kind of concentrate them on those areas where we're seeing that need for weed control. And then sensitive areas, this could be maybe an area burned on your ranch and you want to keep them out of your riparian areas. Some key habitat areas, maybe these are your wildlife areas that you really want to kind of leave set aside to give them that comfort and everything like that, and we keep them out for 12 months or whatever the case might be. I think the possibilities are endless when it comes to virtual fencing. It just depends on what your goals are and the time you want to put into it. Data is huge. I mean, I think if we're going to learn from many of our grazing systems, we got to have data. We got to monitor what we're doing. And with the virtual fencing, we can keep a lot of this data of where are the cows grazing at for a majority of time? How often do they graze there? Are they really spreading out and utilizing the whole pasture, or are they kind of concentrating right there around water? And based on that, we can kind of take that data and say, okay, well, maybe they're concentrating the southwest corner of the pasture, and we want to get them to the northeast part. So maybe we start bringing those fences in and moving them, force them to go places maybe they're not typically going. Or we can look at the data and say, hey, I was in this pasture for 30 days and I feel like I grazed it a little too long. So next time, let's try to be in it for 20 days and really monitor that and stuff. But regardless of all the data that you can get from this, you have got to be out there in the field with those cows, monitoring the land and see what type of recovery that you're getting on it. So how can NRCS help with that data? We can provide you with that GPS information, your existing infrastructure. Like I said, your fences, your water, the type of forage, your grazing units, etc. Water is huge when it comes to this virtual fencing. That's going to be most people's limiting factor. So we can look at that water system and see if we can improve it based on whatever your goals are with your grazing plan. We can also talk to you a little bit about some virtual fence, kind of like I'm doing now, some pros and cons. And then, like I said, we can explore the benefits of the herd movement data for that management. So once we get all that data, we can sit down with you and say, hey, this is how we can or can't improve your grazing system based on all the data we're able to collect from this system. Some pros and cons of permanent fence versus virtual fence. Permanent fence, it fragments landscape connectivity. There's really no flexibility in size of grazing unit. Once you build that fence there, it's going to be there for 50 plus years, hopefully. So we can't just go and change that up at a drop of a hat. The permanent fence does pose a risk to some wildlife. It's a major financial investment. I mean, I'm not going to say that virtual fence is real cheap, but if you have a lease place and you want to go put $25,000 mile fence out there that you may not have that lease next year, it's hard to make that commitment to that property. And then the maintenance, whether that could be any livestock tearing it up, water, or whatever the case might be. Virtual fence has a high upfront cost. It doesn't function on all properties or all management styles. It's not for everybody. It does require some animal training, which I think is often going to be easier. You're going to find to be easier than you'd expect. Some animals, they might develop strategies for pushing through the virtual fence. So if you're married to your animals and you cannot let go of one of them that continues to bust through that virtual fence and respect it, then that may not be the system for you. But if you can get rid of that cow or that heifer or whatever it might be that keeps pushing the system and bring another one in to replace it that fits into your grazing plan, then that could be a good benefit for you. And you're probably going to need some type of permanent fence in place to run your virtual fence. So since virtual fence must be simple, not all grazing systems will be compatible. So how much are you willing to adjust? What are you willing to change as that producer to make this system work? Do you sell your herd annually? Are you running stalkers or something like that? If you do, then it's probably not going to be good for you to have to train animals every year. But if you maintain that same herd with some replacement heifers or something like that, then that might be something you look into. And like I said, what's your plan for the animals that always are trying to beat the system? Are you married to them or can you get rid of them? And do you need that fence year round or seasonally? And that can depend on if it's cropland or pasture or sensitive area or something like that. Some things to consider. What are your goals? Will this technology help you achieve your goals? And when I say your goals, I'm talking about your grazing management goals. How often do you need the fencing year round or seasonally? How many times a year do you want to gather or handle your livestock? You know, you might have some issues with have to adjust the collars and everything like that. Maybe one of them, the battery goes down or something like that. You might have to handle your livestock a little more. Do you need to fence land that you own or lease? Do you want to put all that money on the lease place, or can you just run the virtual collars and take them with you to the next one? Is there a good sales service? That'd be something you'd work with that virtual fence company on. And is there any areas that you want to limit access? These are just some of the very, very few, many alternatives that you can use virtual fence for. So with that being said, here's some references that I went over, and I'll save the questions till the end, and appreciate the time.
Thank you, Colin. Sorry, Sawyer. I'm looking at already at the next script. That's some really good information. I really love hearing about the use case scenarios. That's what people want to hear as well. And thank you. So next, we'll hear from Colin Carl, and he's the Texas sales representative for No Fence. Colin grew up in the cattle business and has a lifelong background in ranching and livestock production. After Tarleton State, he built his career in the feed industry, working closely with producers on livestock nutrition and day-to-day operations. Today, he helps ranchers put No Fence virtual fencing to work to improve grazing management and operational efficiency. He's going to walk us through how the No Fence system works and their approach to livestock management. And Colin, I see you have your presentation. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Yeah. So, like they said, my name is Colin Carroll. I'm the sales rep for Texas for No Fence. I also covered Louisiana and New Mexico. So, if anybody has any friends in those bordering states, don't hesitate to have them reach out to me if they have any questions for us today about No Fence. I also like to say thank you to Sawyer for being such a big advocate. I mean, that was a great presentation as to the pros and cons of virtual fencing and ways that you can use it. That's going to make my presentation a little bit shorter because now we're just going to go over just how the system No Fence works. Kind of going off of what Sawyer said, there's value in every acre. With No Fence, you can create and move virtual boundaries anytime, anywhere. It's flexible without compromise, helping you bring more pasture into play without saving the time it would take to fence it. And like I said, this is very important to me because it goes into the flexibility that Sawyer talked about, giving you options for any type of scenario that you're dealt. You know, whether feast or famine, you have an answer at your fingertips just by implementing a collar on an animal as well as a mobile app on your smart device. So the only things that are needed for the No Fence system are the collars themselves and a smart device to run the app. As you can see pictured in front of y'all is our sheep and goat collar. That'll be the smaller one to the left, as well as our cattle collar. This is all that is needed. No base station is required with the No Fence system in any type of scenario. We operate off of a cellular IoT and satellite GPS, which we'll get into on my next slide. So a lot of people ask me, Colin, you know, what is it with the cellular? Like I'm nervous. You know, I have spotty coverage on my property that, sometimes I get phone calls, sometimes I don't. Like, that's not always an issue with the no fence system because it goes back to that IoT, which is a much simpler cell phone coverage rather than the 5G or smart devices operate off of. I have quite a few users that are in some pretty rural areas that your phone says SOS, and these callers work very well for them in those situations. And then that goes into with the GPS aspect of the collars. Once you get these collars assigned to a pasture, that's when the satellite GPS function kicks in. And that's actually what polices the collars within the boundary and keeping them from roaming into areas that you don't want them to be at. The IoT signal is used for the collars to communicate to the app as well as the app to communicate to the collars. And to help combat some of our low signal areas, we implemented a technology called HerdNet, which actually allows all of our callers to communicate to each other via Bluetooth. So, for example, if you're running a herd of 50 and they're all grouped up in one area, only one of those callers is actually going to be reporting to the app. And then the rest of the callers will be daisy chaining off of that to be able to report, and you get your updates and then also give new commands to the callers. And another thing, it's 100% app driven. We want you to be able to be mobile and be able to be out there with your livestock, to be able to make changes and see what's going on and be able to make those changes on the fly. Figure out where those cattle or sheep or goats are grazing, what they're going after, be able to have a good representation as to where you are when you're building your boundaries, because it represents you within the app to where you're not having to bounce back and forth going, okay, this is what I want to do. Now let's drive all the way back to office, fire up the desktop, and then implement a rotation that way. We want you to be flexible and be able to move with your herd. So a lot of people always ask, how does it actually contain the animal? So the way the no fence system works is as they cross that boundary, the collar will begin to make a noise at them, beeping at them, kind of like the backup camera on a vehicle. As they continue crossing the boundary, they will then receive an electric pulse. If they don't respond to the electric pulse the first time, it'll go through the beeping process and electric pulse process 2 more times before sending you a notification that the animal has actually escaped. Our hopes is to get the animal trained up to where they respond to the beep and we see our electric pulses going down, but is there just in case. To go along with that, people always ask, what happens if an animal gets out and wants to come back in? Do they receive resistance? They actually don't. So once they've escaped from a boundary, you can then still monitor them and come up with a plan as to how you want to get them back in. I always suggest to customers, give her a couple minutes. Odds are she got a little bit curious, got pushed out of the boundary. She's going to want to go back to where she knows it is safe. If that's not the answer at that point, our app updates so quickly you can then move the boundary pasture and recapture. Or if she's going down the road and is really booking it, you got some pretty high-headed cattle from the sale barn that you're trying to get trained up to these collars. At that point, you'll still be able to know where she's at. You can go get her. If you can get her stopped, get her slowed down, then draw a new boundary around her and try to contain her that way. If not, like I said, you still have 24 monitoring on her while she's wearing these collars. Some more virtual fencing ideas that we implement, so we can monitor the grazing patterns, herd movement with data helps you refine rotations, improve pasture utilization, and make better decisions on the ground. Like I said, that's going back to what Sawyer said. With functions within our app, such as herd replay, it allows you to rewind the app and be able to see what the animals have been doing for the past 30 days to be able to know, okay, why are they going here? Why are they congregating here? What's over here that is not over here? And make a plan as to how we can adapt and give that property more rest. Animal health, with virtual fencing, people always think it's just fencing. With the no fence system, our callers actually monitor their movement to check and see if they have reduced movement or no movement at all. And it'll actually give you a notification as to whether or not that's the scenario. And we'll get into that a little bit more on the next slide. And then making every acre count, being able to try new ideas through not having a huge risk of trial and error. Maybe you want to try some more regenerative grazing, targeted grazing. With us, multi-species grazing, utilizing your property, especially more out west, using that goat feed that's available, getting a bang for your buck out of your property, as well as wildfire mitigation, solar grazing, bale grazing, and many more. The world is your oyster when utilizing virtual fencing. It's just how creative you want to get when utilizing this technology. Here's just some pictures of the app. Kind of let you know, people always think that with virtual fencing, you have to have these nice, pretty square pastures that utilize every acre. You don't have to. Like I said, this gives you the flexibility to be able to draw and pinpoint however you want your paddocks to look within the app. As well as, if you can see in the second middle picture, that's a heat map that allows you to see where they've been congregating. That goes back to that herd replay function within our app that'll let you see what they're doing, so you can get out there and look at your property instead of having to worry about moving cattle, stretching poly wire, make sure it's not grounded out. We're going to take that free time to now go out and really look at our property. As well as in the third picture, you can see that you can identify every single caller within the app. You don't have to remember a bunch of random caller numbers, as well as seeing a bunch of different data as well on every specific caller, how they're interacting with the boundary, the battery status of every caller, what pasture they're on, and the connectivity far as them communicating with cellular. And then also, here's what also goes back to the functionality of more than just fencing. With the no fence system, it'll send you those notifications whether the animal hasn't moved as much as normal or hasn't moved at all. So those are going to be really important during possibly the calving seasons, being able to see where they're at, monitoring them, make sure they're not having a problem, or just if you're having problems with hoof rot, being able to identify a problem before it actually becomes a serious problem and you have an animal go down. Being able to have that flexibility and peace of mind, especially also when going out of town. This is another set of eyes that are constantly watching your animals, that you can make decisions for your personal life as well as your operation to give you comfort when utilizing that type of technology. So that's my spiel on no fence. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions at the end, and I'm going to stay the whole time to answer them. And if you think of any confusing ones, feel free to ask them. I'm here to answer any type of questions. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Colin. That's pretty good info as well. Just a reminder for everybody and all the attendees, y'all can write up the questions and put them in the chat and the Q&A already, so we can put them in line and have a smooth Q&A at the end. So just feel free to be putting those questions in. So our last speaker today is Mark Duderstadt, territory manager with Halter. Mark works alongside with cattle producers across Texas to improve grazing management, labor efficiency, and ranch productivity. He's got deep roots in Texas agriculture and more than 25 years of commercial experience. And he's passionate about helping ranchers use technology to build stronger, more sustainable operations. So he's going to go show us today how this Halter system works and how it fits into grazing operations. And Mark, over to you.
First of all, thank you so much, Severio, for putting this together, and thank you for everyone that's attending. Always welcome the opportunity to get in front of producers and rural professionals as they're kind of thinking about virtual fencing. My name, as Severio mentioned, is Mark Duderstadt. I live in Fredericksburg, grew up there. Both my grandfathers were ranchers, have been involved, kind of in that world for a while. And, in my professional life, kind of moved to a completely different industry. But as soon as I, had the opportunity, I came back and have been really, I think, over the last year and a half with Halter, focusing on ranches in kind of Texas broadly, and now more specifically, West Texas and South Texas. The impact of virtual fencing, regardless of the vendor, has been, it's been a game changer for folks. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys about it a little bit more. So when I start, when I have the opportunity to sit in front of producers, and Sawyer kind of spoke to a little bit as well, but, I always like to start with this question, and it's, if you had an unlimited fencing budget and could shift animals at the press of a button, how would you ranch? I think with virtual fencing, it really does provide flexibility that just hasn't existed in the past. I think from the standpoint of, kind of rotational grazing management, many of the practices, that Colin and Sawyer both mentioned, I don't think there's any debate that there's positive impact to your, kind of your ranch, to your, beef productivity. So it's, in the past, it's just been, the tools that are needed, the time, the resources that are needed to execute on that. And I think with virtual fencing, it's a complete game changer. So I'll talk a little bit about Halter and kind of its beginnings, but at a very high level, as has already been discussed. Halter is a solar powered collar that you can use to move, monitor, and fence cattle from anywhere. Similar to Colin, we drive the system off of an app. So it doesn't matter if you're on ranch, if you're sitting at the breakfast table, or in the event that you get to take a vacation, you can be sitting on the beach in Florida and still kind of monitoring and managing your cattle. I'll talk through Halter just quickly. I like to provide a little bit of history around Halter just because a lot of people feel like we're a new company because we've been in the U.S. for about 2 years. The reality is that Halter's been in existence for the last 9. This is Craig Piggott, our founder and CEO. Craig grew up on a dairy farm in New Zealand, super bright guy. Felt like there was potentially a better way to utilize technology just to manage a dairy, be able to manage, a farm in general. And, after, I guess, when he went to university, he graduated, with a degree in mechanical engineering, actually went to work initially for Rocket Labs, which is analogous to SpaceX here. But early on in his career there, he went and met with Peter Beck, who was and is the CEO and founder of SpaceX, but presented his idea or his concept around Halter to Peter Beck. And I've heard the story a couple of different ways. One is that within an hour, and the second iteration is within the day, doesn't really matter. But, within that day or hour, Peter Beck, essentially fired Craig, shook his hand, and wrote him a check that was the seed funding for Halter. So, we've been, Craig has been at it for the last 9 years, really established our technology, vetted the technology, across the dairy industry. And then about 2 years ago, decided, to expand to the U.S. We are, as I mentioned, started in New Zealand. Our global headquarters is still in Auckland. We have expanded to Australia and the U.S. We definitely have, additional expansion, plans and, for the near future. This slide, states that, we have over 1 million collars globally. It's a little bit dated. I think this is from March. We're probably closer to 1.5 million. So again, the reason I like to mention that is just to kind of, let people know that we're not a 2-year-old company. We're not, we've really vetted this technology, and it's been wildly successful across, all 3 of these countries. And I think we're going to be, seeing that expand into others. So how the system works, similar to, what Colin mentioned, we have a collar as well. You can see ours, in the photo on the left. We are direct to satellite. We originally, I guess up until about 4 months ago, we utilized towers. So we would set up a radio network across your ranch utilizing towers, super robust, reliable system that we still, support and maintain. We have 1 million collars that are enabled in that tower-based scenario that we're going to continue to support. And in some instances, it's still the better solution. I think with direct to satellite, particularly, for this audience, as I think about, kind of moving into West Texas, big country, folks that have multiple lease places, the towers honestly were a bit of a rate limiter from the standpoint of how many towers would you need, from the standpoint of a lease. And I think it was spoken to, it's hard to make a big investment in capital infrastructure on a lease, knowing that you may not be able to stay on it for very long, or you don't get to decide how long you get to stay on it. So the direct to satellite for us, we don't require towers. We don't require cell service. We are able to go direct to satellite. And again, our system is driven, off of the app, so that as you can see in the picture, you're able to run that while you're on ranch. But also, as I mentioned, you can run that from the breakfast table or, from the beach, or the mountains, wherever you like to vacation. I'm going to play this real quick. Hopefully it'll give you guys a sense of how the direct to satellite collars work.
You heard right. Halter virtual fencing is now powered by satellite. No matter where your cattle graze or where you virtually fence, unlimited fencing is now available for even the most remote operations. No towers required. Yep, sky's the limit now. Each animal wears a lightweight, solar-powered collar that connects via satellite to a mobile phone app. Farmers and ranchers use this app to create virtual fences and move their herd remotely. When a virtual fence is created in the app, the instructions are sent to the cloud and back down to the collars via satellite. At regular intervals, collars take turns as leaders in the herd, and connect to satellite to download information about virtual fence locations and new grazing areas. The leader collar then shares this information to the other collars in the herd. Collars also share information, such as location and animal behavior, back to the leader collar. This data can be viewed 24/7 in real time in the Halter app. Throughout this process, system checks ensure that all collar data is successfully uploaded and that every collar receives the latest instructions. The cycle then repeats, keeping the herd connected. So that's it. Sky's the limit now.
And as I mentioned, I think that the flexibility that comes with that direct-to-satellite capability has really been, I think it's really driven a lot of uptake of virtual fencing for us, and the impact on some of those larger properties has been profound. So the collars themselves, you can see a picture of our collar here. A little bit different than some that you'll see. The business end or the electronics of our collar all sit on the top of the cow's neck. Really, everything there's really nothing below what you see in the picture here. From an electronic standpoint, it really is just the ergonomic collar, and then there's a counterweight at the bottom. We have 2 solar panels that keep you from having to ever charge or replace a battery. These collars really are built to put on a cow and leave it on her for 5 to 7 years. That's something that I think is a big game changer as well. I'll talk a little bit about some of the sensory cues in the next slide. We say that cows learn to hear fences instead of see fences. I'll play this little bit, but what we find is that after the cows are trained, they really are contained by the auditory cues more than anything. Probably 95% of the containment is done by auditory cues. One of the kind of slight differences for us is that we're able to directionally guide the cattle. So as cattle get to the virtual break that you've drawn, the algorithm actually knows what's the quickest way to turn that cow back into the break. So if we want to turn that cow to the right, we're actually going to tone her behind her left ear. They naturally move away from that tone, head turns, body follows. The effectiveness of kind of being able to keep them in the break, because of that, we've definitely seen in kind of the iterations over the last 9 years of it's incredibly effective. If they do proceed beyond that initial beep, it is similar to kind of backing your truck up into a parking spot. Those beeps will get closer and closer until it's a solid tone. If she then goes beyond that solid tone, the secondary cue is a mild electric shock. And when I say mild electric shock, it's about 1% of a typical electric fence on normal setting, 2% on the highest setting. And the difference between the normal setting and the highest setting is that the algorithm actually knows the behavior of each individual cow. A collar is tied to an individual cow and monitors its specific behavior. So after 21 days, if you have a cow that kind of hangs out in the middle of the break with the rest of the herd, we're going to keep her settings on normal. For those cows that are a little bit more kind of adventurous or ornery, I think everybody has them. If they're the ones that are kind of pushing the barrier more often, the algorithm knows that and will turn up those settings to drive compliance. So that we have found to be incredibly effective. Honestly, the containment cues, the cows pick up on within 24 to 36 hours. It's amazing how quick it is. We also have a vibration cue, so you're able to shift, within pasture. You can do that remotely. You can schedule it. You can do it while you're standing in the pasture. But with that, we actually have a positive cue that we have incorporated into collar. It's a vibration that through the training they learn is a positive cue for fresh pasture, green grass. We have folks that are moving cows 4 times a day. We have folks that are moving cows, once every 3 or 4 weeks. But that vibration is something that, that the cows become very accustomed to. And like I said, it's a positive cue for them to move to the portion of the pasture that you want. We have a number of welfare safeguards, engineered and built into the collars as well. I won't dig too much into that, but I think it does highlight just the extent to which Halter really focuses on animal welfare. This is kind of a screen display of our app. This really is where you kind of manage the system, drive the system. You can view and manage your herd from your mobile device. Obviously, each of those dots, is an individual cow. You can zoom in, select that cow and be able to, kind of see what's going on with her. You have some options, whether it be to, pause the collar, capture a calving date. There's a lot of utility that's built into that. With this, we've made it very simple in that, we are drawing kind of, four-sided breaks. For us, we understand the benefit of being able to, work around riparian areas, or, if there are areas that have burned either, by wildfire or prescribed burn, and you want to keep them out of that, you actually have up to 60 data points to create what we call a polygon, or the fence. So, you can be very creative around, working around those things or creating lanes to water. As Sawyer mentioned, water really is the rate limiting step in many instances, and being able to be creative around how you utilize that is something that, we're able to do very well. So, as I mentioned, we've been in New Zealand for 9 years. We've been in the U.S. for the last 2. Over the last 2 years, beef base is really the product that we've had, and that's for containing and moving animals around your ranch. You can see where, the location of every animal from a GPS standpoint. You have the ability to remotely shift and move herds between breaks. All the things that I've mentioned. For us, we really see, virtual fencing as just the beginning. One of the exciting things for me is, as technology continues to develop, the capabilities, are endless, quite frankly. And really, our focus is to move beyond just virtual fencing and moving cattle, herd visibility, but really moving into that broader ecosystem with pasture and grazing management, animal health and reproductive monitoring, and then increased cattle production as well. So, a lot of the features that I'm going to mention here in Beef Pro are things that we've done in New Zealand and have had there for a while. We just want to make sure that, we kind of grow in a very systematic way to make sure that we're fully executing on every one of these. So I'll talk briefly. The middle section really is the execution that you saw in the beef base product. The Beef Pro product includes everything that's there, but also the ability to kind of view animal feed demand when drawing breaks. View grazing days allocated when drawing breaks. It just allows you to take a lot of the grazing management, and kind of bring it into one spot. From a measure and planning standpoint, quantifying feed demand, recording feed supply, and bringing land and animal data together automatically. I think that is one thing that in talking to producers, I hear a lot. There are a lot of tools out there, multiple apps, but the ability to kind of consolidate that into one spot is, I think there's huge benefit to that, and huge convenience in that, and incorporating data that we're already calculating and collecting from an animal standpoint and incorporating that into your grazing management plan. Huge utility in that. And then on the far right side, review and improve. You can view historical animal locations over time, whether that be, you can monitor, specific herds grazing across your property in a time-lapse fashion. You can look at individual cows as well, but we can also, we're also assessing, on an individual cow basis, when they're resting, when they're ruminating, when they're grazing. Heat detection and calving detection are things that we're bringing forward as well. And then the grazing heat maps, I'll walk through that with a little bit of detail. So I'm going to go through these pretty quick for sake of time. I know we're getting close, but you are able to set up grazing templates in seconds. We too have kind of focused on driving the system from a mobile device out in the pasture. When it comes to developing a year-long or a seasonal grazing plan, the ability to do that on a web app is something that people have asked for, and something that we've certainly enabled. Gives you a little more room to kind of plan out the year, and then kind of overlay that or incorporate that into the app. Obviously, a ton of flexibility associated with being able to do that, depending upon, the rainfall or drought, those sorts of things obviously drive, kind of the need for adjustment. But, this is, people have been very, very pleased with. I talked about, combining available forage and animal feed demand. That's something that, that we've incorporated as well, where as you're drawing a break, you're able to see, kind of what area you're providing, what amount of forage you're providing, and it will give you kind of an estimated time based on animal feed demand as to when, how long you should leave them in that particular break. Real-time animal behavior, I talked about this a little bit. I won't spend much time on it, but the ability to monitor on a per cow basis when they're resting, when they're ruminating, when they're grazing, a lot of insight into animal health. We obviously want animals to be as healthy as possible, increase breed up, all the things, that, are kind of add to your, kind of overall operational efficiency, but then heat detection and calving detection as well. I think those are huge things that people are certainly focused on, and I think will see great benefit as far as how they manage their herd and their ranch. Grazing heat maps. I think this is amazing insight. A lot of times we think we know what cows are doing on a regular basis or where they're spending time grazing. I think to Sawyer's example, a big benefit of virtual fencing is, if you look at the most northern portion of the ranch on the right, the red areas, are the areas that they've spent, the most time grazing. Lighter pink, obviously less time, it's all relative, but you can see areas that are overgrazed. And then if you say, for instance, that area on the far north, that's still green, it's obviously, been undergrazed. Maybe that's an area that, is great forage and they just haven't gone there. So the ability to really push them there and really maximize your pasture utilization, kind of days you're able to get out of pasture, is a key component of that. Rest periods, same sort of thing. We'll kind of give you an overlay of how long an area has been resting. I'm going to, I always think it's powerful for you guys to hear from producers themselves. I'm going to play a short video, and then we'll kind of, actually, I'm not going to play a short video. We're kind of coming up to time, but Daniel Mushrush up in Kansas, had used a previous version of virtual fencing, from another vendor, is now a huge proponent of Halter. And I think one of the things that he speaks to, and I'm happy to, kind of provide, kind of his kind of producer, kind of profile or highlight to you guys after the fact, but his ability to kind of take the same existing land and really increase the carrying capacity based on being able to better manage grazing, more intensively graze, it's been pretty profound. This is a little bit of a dated slide, but he was able to lift his herd size from 400 to 550 on the same plot of land, and to hear him kind of talk through it is powerful. So I'll skip over the video for sake of time. My apologies for that. I will talk briefly about what I really feel like is our secret sauce. We're super proud of the technology and kind of where it is, where it's going. I think we're in a, like I said, it's been a game changer for folks, but where I think our secret sauce is in the support that we provide every producer. As producers come on with Halter, we will dedicate an onboarding specialist to them. They'll work with them for, it's about 6 to 7 weeks. 3 weeks before collars go on, we'll work with them to make sure they understand, the app, the collars. We're going to want to understand from them, from the producer, what their current grazing strategy is, kind of what they would like to do moving forward. And we're going to build a training plan for the rancher as well as the cattle, to accommodate that. Collars go on, and then for another 3 or 4 weeks afterwards, that team will ride along. They're going to be able to kind of see breaks you've drawn. They're going to be able to consult with you on how do you best leverage water, but they're going to make sure that this system is working, as we expect, as you expect. And like I said, I really feel like it's a secret sauce. The other beauty of that team is that they've overseen the implementation across every ranch we have in the U.S. They have a wealth of experience, whether that be on how to best manage water, how to draw breaks around, kind of sensitive areas, or being able to keep, kind of, a lot of folks have hunting enterprises, if you want to keep kind of the, kind of protein feeders, hunting blinds, kind of separated, from where you're keeping your cows, they have a lot of experience on just how to really maximize the, kind of the virtual fencing system that we provide. Training for cattle really takes about 7 to 10 days. They're going to be with you through that process. But like I said, the containment cues usually take 24 to 36 hours. The vibrational cue for shifting takes a little bit longer just because it's not intuitive to them, but they learn it very quickly. The more reps they get, the more accustomed they are to that. So I'll 2 more quick slides here. Our commitment to our producers, we have 24-hour support. There's a button in the app if you need help, if you have a problem, if you just have a question on how to best graze a particular portion of your ranch. We have a support team that's going to be available to you 24/7. There's an urgent help button as well. If you have something go wrong 2 o'clock in the morning, you hit that urgent help and you're going to get a response back in minutes, not not hours or days. The last thing I'll speak to here is really constant innovation through user feedback. A big part of my job is working with producers after they have halter and really understanding what's working well for them, what may not be working as well, but features that they would like to see. And the iteration with halter is incredibly fast. I've seen recommendations from producers come to me, be fed into our R&D and development teams, and those be replicated or kind of put into the app within months. That feedback loop is critical for us. We definitely want to make sure that we're continuing to improve on this product, and the way that we do that is from feedback from producers like yourself. So I will stop there. Saverio, I know we're just up to time. I apologize for, if we've run long, but I'm definitely available to sit around and, answer any questions that anybody has. This is my contact information as well. If anyone wants to reach out, I'd welcome the opportunity to come in and sit down and learn about your specific operation and how halter might be able to, help increase your ranch efficiency.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate your time and explaining a little bit about how the halter system works. Before we get started with questions, just a reminder to look out after the webinar is finished for an email with a server link. That's to help us improve the programs and see how we can do better for y'all to deliver information. And you will also be entered to win a door prize. So just FYI. You'll probably be getting something in the mail. So now let's get with your questions. We do have several questions. So the audience has been really active right now. The first one that I saw come in, it's I'm just going to read it. It's going to be open for all three of y'all, whoever wants to answer it. And so it goes, I think one of the biggest barriers to adoption is the proof of concept. So what independent research or producers experience demonstrates how reliably virtual fencing actually contains livestock? For example, are there documented success failure rates or manufacturer guarantees? What happens if the system fails? Even fences fail, I assume collars won't hold all livestock as well as physical barrier. That's a long question. I don't know, but whoever feels free to answer that, go ahead.
So I can take a crack at it, and then obviously give Colin a chance to address that as well. From a kind of effectiveness of the fencing, we do stipulate that that the rancher is responsible for the perimeter fence. That's really for kind of more of a legal or liability reason. If we say it's bulletproof and you're gonna and then there's a cow that gets out on the highway and gets hit by a truck, then we all have a problem. But what I will say is virtual fencing, the effectiveness of halter, we have folks that are taking up interior fences to maximize leverage, but have been very pleased with kind of the effectiveness of containment, the effectiveness of shifting. For us, and I'm trying to think back to all the components of the question, Saverio, but one of the things that comes up is what happens if you lose signal. For us, we have that built into the system that if something were to go wrong with the system, those cows are going to be held in their existing break for 24 hours. That gives us time to get the system back up and running, or it gives you time to kind of figure out where you may need to move them. But there's been a lot of engineering that's gone into kind of that risk mitigation and making sure that regardless of the circumstance, we're able to kind of ensure the well-being of the cattle.
Awesome. Colin, do you have something to add on that one?
Yeah, I can add to the fact that, with no fence, we've seen 97% containment rate with our collars. But like Mark said, there are cases where animals do get out, fences do fail, virtual fences does have hiccups and mishaps. But that's where we also have technology in place to be able to, keep those animals contained when the system is failed. That's where the satellite GPS aspect comes in. That's what's keeping those animals contained. Very rarely do I see an issue when I get on Google Maps that those satellites aren't working correctly. And then also, with the no fence system, it goes back to, like Mark said, depending on what state you're in and what laws and regulations are in place. But with the no fence system, that's that risk assessment that you need to take on yourself. If an animal does get out, what kind of problems is it going to cause for you, and worse, the people surrounding you, i.e., people on the road and things like that. I tell people, if you trust one strand of polywire and they get out and they're, miles away from civilization, that's not the end of the world. Let's just give that cow an opportunity to get back into that virtual break and then restart that containment process all over. But I run my cattle on a pretty busy road. I wouldn't want them getting out in the road either. So that's why I've tried to do my best to maintain at least the fencing around my property to keep them out of the road, and then just utilize virtual fencing from containment region. But I do know quite a few people that are using them with no fencing at all. But like I said, if they do quote unquote escape, it is not a risk to them or people surrounding them.
Thank you, Colin. There's a lot of questions, so if we can answer them later on an email, that'd be great. We'll go with 3 more. I'm sorry we went over a little bit more of the time, the scheduled time, but for all presenters, can you speak out to your experience with observing creep grazing and added weaning weight?
Colin, you want to take this one first, or I'm happy to go too?
Yeah. So that's one thing that I recently just had a customer reach out to me. He just started implementing virtual fencing on a pretty large scale. And that's one thing that he's already loved to be able to see the results. He's able to utilize his virtual fencing, keeping his mama cows in areas that, they typically wouldn't stay at. We're making those cows hustle a little bit more and eat the stuff that's not as palatable, and then giving the opportunity to let those calves get out ahead of them and creep graze and really get some really great weaning weights. I know some people that have really, really seen improvement just by utilizing this technology here in Texas by having that creep graze scenario. A lot of people complain about the fact, like, well, what do I do with the calves? Are they not going to be contained? I'm like, they're not going to be contained to a point that it's also going to be beneficial to you. Like I said, they're going to be able to get ahead of those mama cows, get to that forage that is going to let them make those higher gains, and then keep those mama cows in areas to where we're going to make them hustle. We're going to utilize this property to the best of its ability and get the best of both worlds. We're going to creep graze those calves, and we're going to keep those mama cows hustling and eating everything down, trampling things down, and keeping it going.
Yeah, similar for us. I mean, I think the benefit of creek grazing is, I'm not sure it was an intended consequence, but it definitely is something that people are seeing the benefit of. Those calves being able to get out, into that, kind of fresh stuff, the green stuff, quicker than, before the mama cows do. Weaning weights is definitely something that we're seeing. We've got relationships with Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State. We're working to kind of put together that, specific data to really support that. But what I can say is anecdotally, for ranchers that we have, that have been utilizing halter for the last 2 years, they are definitely seeing that.
So thank you both. Another question: can bulls be collared, and what tips do you have for keeping them on?
I'll speak on the no fence system. So there are quite a bit of upsides to being able to collar the bulls. We do sell longer chains to accommodate for those larger necked bulls. Virtual fencing isn't the greatest solution for a bull. I'm always very honest with my producers when it comes to that. Sometimes a pipe fence or a good 5-strand barbed wire fence can't keep a bull in. If he gets it across his mind, he wants to go over there and fight another bull, get to a hot cow, or if he's just bored. But the upside of being able to know where your bull's at when he's separated himself from the herd, being able to monitor if you're running multiple bulls with that herd replay function, who's working and who's not working, and then for containment purposes, utilizing it when collaring all your cattle or your cows as well as the bulls, keeping him contained with the mama cows at a more efficient rate rather than giving him free range has been some really upsides that we've seen with the bulls. Like I said, is it a solution for containing bulls? No. If you have an ornery bull that he gets it across his mind, there's not much in the world that can stop him. But the upside of being able to have the health monitoring, being able to tell whether if he's lame or something, laid down, got hurt during breeding, or just being able to tell who's working and who's not, who's loafing underneath the shade tree and who's actually topping cows.
Yeah, it's very similar for us. I mean, I think it really depends on, kind of the temperament of the bulls, the age of the bulls. The kind of the nuance for us, and probably similar for Colin, is that, as bulls get older, kind of necks get bigger than, as they neck out, necks bigger than heads. It just becomes physics, being able to keep those collars on. I will say, I was part of a collaring down at East Foundation, and we collared everything that came through the chute, including some of the biggest King Ranch bulls I've seen. And from a location standpoint for those guys, it was critical. Did some of those come off? They did, which isn't surprising, again, just based on physics. But, in talking to them, I asked them if they would do it again, and they said absolutely. For us to be able to kind of locate those bulls, in the country that they run, it was a game changer for them. So yeah, bulls are something that we, are open to people collaring, but, there are some caveats, as Colin mentioned.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both for that. Just a follow-up question on that. From y'all's experience, is there any breeds that work better with virtual fencing, or would it really depend on the individual?
We really haven't found a breed that it doesn't work on. I mean, we're definitely on, we have full-blooded Brahman, we have Corriente, we have every Angus variety that there is. I've seen some, borderline wild cattle that, well, not even borderline, but, we've had success across the gamut.
Same here with the no fence system. I get calls quite often with, very traditional operations to, like, questioning, especially with me dealing in Louisiana, do they work on high-headed tiger strapped Brangus cattle, Brahman cattle? Absolutely. To where one of my better customers said, "Hey, I got a smoking deal on some mini Herefords. I'm going to call her some mini Herefords," and they've been working great for him.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to read out one last question from the audience. There's just a lot of questions. If y'all want to, y'all can feel free to answer the ones in the Q&A yourself. There's some very specific ones for each of the companies. So I'm leaving that one for y'all, but I'm just trying to stick for more of the more general kind of questions. But so do you see cow collars needing to be adjusted coming off of winter and going into summer gain, or vice versa? Body condition score changes?
I'd say with the no fence system, it's more based on, age. I know when I collared my cattle, I put them on some younger cows and also some older cows. That's just one thing that you're going to be running these cattle through the chutes somewhat frequently enough to be able to monitor that. So just being able to keep an eye on it, making sure that that animal, if it is an animal that you plan on seeing growing, maybe it fitted a little bit loose, just tight enough to where it doesn't give you issues and it falls off. But also, like I said, you still want to have that good contact with the chain on its neck for the no fence system. So being able to worry about an animal growing into it, I mostly see it on younger animals. Just plan accordingly for it.
Yeah, same for us. I mean, I think fitment is key. For us, we have kind of a 3-finger rule as far as, kind of guidance, 3 fingers in between the collar and the neck. Once, when the cow's head is upright, what that does is it creates a pretty tidy, collar, less apt to get hung up and stuff. But, for us too, I mean, younger stock that's going to be growing fast, we do recommend that people kind of monitor and potentially adjust those. It really depends on the breed, how fast they're growing as to how often, we recommend that. But similar to what Colin said, if we know it's younger stock that's going to be growing fast, we kind of try to find that middle ground of, making sure that it's tight enough to be retained, but, loose enough to allow for some growth.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to have to cut it off with that question. I mean, feel free, everybody, to email them, contact them directly. These are great people with a lot of good information, and they'll be very, very glad to help y'all out with any questions y'all have if y'all are wanting to get into this. Thanks to all our 3 presenters with Sawyer, Colin, and Mark. Please help me give them a big round of applause. And thanks to you all for joining. I just want to remind y'all, keep an eye out on the webinar survey link that's going to be sent through the email to all the attendees. And we'll be recording this. And then also, if Colin, Sawyer, or Mark have any resources y'all want to share with me, please feel free to forward them to me, and I'll share them with the attendees. I hope this was helpful for everyone, whether you're looking into virtual fencing or just want to understand it. I hope this was a very solid, unbiased place to start. Therefore, at the end, there's my, if you want to scan that QR code, that's my information. Y'all feel free to email me or message me or anything. We do have a Facebook Trans-Pecos Rangelands Facebook page, so I'll constantly be uploading their snippets of the video of the webinar and things like that. So thank you everybody for joining, and thank you for all the 3 speakers. I hope y'all have a good rest of the day and a good Thursday. Thank you all for joining. Have a good one.